Hello, colleagues, and welcome to the next episode of DINCast, where we're going to be exploring the world of customer service and customer experience and how that's been disrupted and what the future looks like. And I'm delighted to be joined by Joe Causon, who's the Chief Exec of the Institute of Customer Service, who's going to help us understand what the future of customer service is going to look like. Joe, welcome to this session this morning.
Ian, it's an absolute pleasure to be with you today, and thank you very much for inviting me along.
Thank you. Well, for those people who don't know you, I'm sure most people will know you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your leadership journey.
Okay, so my mum frequently asks me what the Institute does for a living, Ian. So in a nutshell, why do we exist and what we're trying to do? So the Institute is all about trying to raise the standards of customer service and customer experience. And not because that's a nice thing to do, but what we're here to do is to try and help our members, who are varied across many different industry sectors, to raise their standards of customer service because there's an economic imperative to do so. So we know that those organisations that have much higher levels of customer satisfaction will have, over a period of time, higher levels of profitability, better productivity, higher levels of trust, loyalty, etc. And frankly, really, and that's what we're here to do. So, and as a leader in that field, as you will know, Ian, I'm very passionate about trying to champion the importance of customer service and customer experience, but not as a bolt-on, not as a department, not as a function, but as a key strategic driver for any business.
So, obviously, we had this sort of major crisis that we're now sort of working our way through. I mean, how have your members and leaders sort of responded from a customer service perspective?
Really good question, Ian. And I think, wow, what an experience, and we're still going through it, aren't we? Let's be honest with you. So I think the initial stages, so we're about 14 weeks in, and I think in the initial stages, if I looked at the membership, I think we have, and I think everyone would say, is they've amazed themselves. And what I mean by that is just how fast and how able they are to respond to the issues and the challenges that they've had. Many organisations have said to me, we achieve more in 2 weeks that would normally take us 2 years. So this whole kind of really pretty good crisis management in terms of understanding what needs to be done, lifting and shifting whole premises to work from home, all of those sorts of things pretty quickly, and really got on top of that very well. And I think what did they do that particularly shone or stood out for me, I guess, around those, Ian, would be that we're pretty strong on communications and, really building regular and solid comms with their people, but also with their customers. They really looked to try and understand what their customers' needs were. And during that period, good organisations, I think, sought to service rather than sell. And it's quite interesting. You can see, certain organisations, like every kind of period, have done well during that time. Others might have been found a bit more wanting. And it's those organisations that I think were genuine, authentic, reached out, looked to help. Let's face it, we were all pretty in the soup and not quite sure what was going on as customers and consumers. And those organisations that look to help their customers have been the ones that actually have done pretty well during this period.
So that's looking at it through the lens of sort of the service provider. I just wondered whether you had any thoughts on whether customers' views of their experiences during lockdown will have changed into the future, that they're going to demand services delivered in a different way.
I think it's really interesting, Ian. So behaviour, as you and I know, takes a little while to change, and consumer behaviour and customer behaviour. But what I think we have seen is a couple of things going on. We've certainly seen, in terms of us as consumers, a rise in doing things much more locally, the rise of the community, and actually being very passionate about things that my family and things close to me. And isn't it interesting? Probably 12 months ago, we were doing far more in terms of going to big retail malls and everything else, whereas my local community and working locally has been much more of a driver. So I think there's this localism that we've definitely seen. We're seeing back to basics. We've seen actually, as customers and consumers, a strong desire to consume less. And I think a realization that we don't need as much stuff, maybe. There's a great book that's called Stuffification. I don't know if you've ever seen it, Ian, but it's quite interesting about how we declutter our lives. And I've certainly seen that as a key aspect from a customer point of view. Also, I think there will be some interesting bits around the whole green agenda and about the environment and the whole thing around sustainability. So I think there's some interesting sort of things that we're starting to see from the customer point of view. And then from the organisational point of view, how do we respond to that?
How do organisations reimagine a sort of customer service when we were now used to working in a very different way? That, you know, you've got half of us working remotely, half of us sort of still working on service delivery. You know, customers are going to want things sort of in a different way. So, you know, I suppose for me, it's how do you maintain that human touch, though? You know, because the service industry is about that empathetic involvement.
I think it's a really good question. And if you look at, Ian, we've done some work really around this, looking at what customers want, where they're going with things. And I think you can have a bit of a hybrid. So for lots of things, you know, the transactional elements about keeping it easy, making sure it's efficient, and using online for all those, they've been growing anyway. And actually, what COVID-19 has done is probably just accelerated some of those aspects. But I also think, and actually now we're further through the crisis, there's even greater opportunity to add that degree of personalisation, to add that degree of contact, to make it much more emotional. When I look at all our data, what drives customer satisfaction is not the functional aspects of it. What drives it is how you made me feel. So the challenge for us as organisations is how we're going to be able to do that when we're doing that more remote. So if you think about, you know, wearing masks, social distancing, all of those things are quite alien to us as human beings, and are pretty alien to those of us that like to give customer service too. So what we have to think about in terms of reimagining that is how do you make that feel less alienating for people? How do you make people feel more relaxed and content? Now, our research showed that the number one things that really mattered to customers, we've just done some research around this, was keeping them safe. So those organisations, when I'm actually going to that store, I'm out there actually visiting it, or in that restaurant, those organisations that have demonstrated that they've taken social distancing seriously, they've put all the hand sanitisers in, they care about all of those things and are really genuinely showing that builds confidence in us as customers and consumers. The other point too that we want as customers is we want organisations to demonstrate that they've cared about their employees too. So that's an increasing kind of trend around making sure that we're looking after our own people has become one of those things. So the things that I would say really matter, Ian, going forward are being authentic, communicating well, trying to service rather than sell to, advice and knowledge, looking after your customers and demonstrating that you're doing all the right things in terms of keeping them safe, and also your employees. And where organisations are doing that, you know, some of the trusted brands, we've started to see some of the brands that have been heritage brands have scored particularly well in the latest UK CSI because they've been honest, upfront, straightforward, less corporate probably in their messaging, and much more connected to their customers.
It's interesting you picked up on customer satisfaction. I think there's a couple of areas I'd like to sort of explore with you there. I think one of the things, certainly in our space with which I work with my members, that actually COVID has led to customer satisfaction actually increasing. So I'm just wondering what your view would be in terms of why is it taking COVID to allow us to deliver a higher level of service and experience?
So I think there's a couple of things here, and you're absolutely right, Ian. Our members would also suggest that during the COVID-19, certainly the initial stages, most organisations have seen an increase in customer sat. So why is that? Because I think in some cases, what that has meant is because you've got less people perhaps in the store, or less people actually requiring individual service. You've been able to actually have better conversations with people. So in some ways, the drive to push people to do things more by self-service or online is that when you actually had that physical experience, it felt better because they had longer to deal with you. They had a better chance of having a conversation with you. So what you've seen is a push in some ways for some of the things that perhaps we wouldn't have done online. We've actually worked out, actually, it's just as easy to do that. So it's in an increase on online or self-serving activities. But that has meant when we've actually had the experience with the human being, they've had more time to probably spend with us trying to sort that out, if that makes sense. So I think there is a real function aspect of this. However, and I don't want to be the sort of gloom and doom, I also think that during this time, as customers, we were a little bit more forgiving. We were a little bit more accepting that actually everything wasn't normal. And therefore, we're probably a bit more sort of kind of team spirit, and we're all in this together, and therefore less critical of the organisations and what they were doing for us. However, and this is the however bit, we're now getting a little bit of cabin fever going on. We're all getting a little bit frustrated. And to your point, we're starting to live in a bit of a hybrid world. So we're not all at home anymore, and therefore what we're seeing is expectations rising again. Hang on a second, we're back to normal. Lockdown's finished, hasn't it? This whole kind of sense of, actually, I now expect those service levels. So we think, and what I'm starting to see is that there might be some real challenges around customer satisfaction as we go forward during this period. And secondly, just to that, there are some organisations that still, sadly, and I know you'll find this shocking, Ian, as I do, see customer service as a cost, or see that. So they might look to cut some of those things. Now, when they do that, unfortunately, there's always a lag effect, but eventually the customer sat will also follow and fall. So, we're at a really important time for ourselves as organisations. So we cannot afford to take the eye off the ball at this moment, and we need to really keep ourselves focused on delivering that brilliant service.
So you mentioned about customer expectations, and I just wondered whether it's time to sort of stop measuring customer satisfaction in terms of as a lag measure and starting to say, well, tell you what's customers' expectations and how do we measure ourselves against those expectations? What will your views be on that?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. What you can see, and if you look at the UK CSI, so we've done it 10 years now, and what you will see is that as organisations, where we maybe take the eye off the ball. So what we're talking about in terms of customer service, what are the important elements of that, and what should we be measuring, and what should we be looking for? Well, number one, there is some real basic hygiene factors that you cannot afford to not do. So all of the stuff around making it easy, making sure the website is easily navigable, making sure that I phone back when I said I would, making sure that your people are professional, well-trained, all of those sorts of things. The product service experience is what I thought it was going to be. But the things that actually are going to become even more important as we look forward are, we're going to be watched as organisations. So what I mean by that is, what is our genuine customer ethos? Are we demonstrating actually living by the values that we are setting? Are we really driving a strong ethical approach and sustainable approach to our businesses? Those are going to be the things. I've got less monies in my pockets. I'm going to be much more choosy as a consumer. So I'm going to want to work with or spend my money with organisations that I think are genuinely doing those things. So the things that we should be measuring are the basic things about making sure that you're getting it right, all the essential services right first time, because they matter from a productivity point of view. You do not want to be sorting out problems that cost you money. But the things that actually I remember, the things that are hugely personal to me, and they are much softer. How do they respond to me? Do they show they cared? Do I believe them? Does the leadership of this organisation genuinely promote a real customer-centric approach? So indicators, what customer satisfaction is. Financials tell us where we've been here. Customer sat tells us where we're going. And that is very powerful combined with the employee engagement scores. If you look at both of those scores, you have a pretty good idea where your future will lie. So if you start to see your customer sat falling and your employee engagement scores falling, then it's quite a good chance that over a longer period of time, your commercial figures will start to fall too.
So you lead a large membership body across multi sort of sectors. How is the Institute of Customer Service going to change then in the future?
Wow, really good question. Lots of different things. We've done some things now. So we've been trying quite hard, and I'm sure we can still do this better. So we're never complacent. So that's the first message, really, Ian. And there's always loads of us, the things that we can learn. And being pan-sector, certain sectors have been impacted differently to other sectors. It's not uniform in terms of how we've been seeing things. So responding to that is quite important. But as you will know, much of our training has genuinely and historically been delivered physically. So we're in the process of now moving everything to an online environment. But we want to give choice. So one of those kind of things will be about making sure that our members can utilise and use our training in a way that suits them, be that physical or but also be that virtual. So that's one kind of classic approach to that. We've also thought much more about, the Institute's role is about being a conduit, about bringing people together and sharing best practice. So we've done quite a lot of work around, okay, so who are the new vulnerable customers? How can we help you to help them? What are the kind of the top tips in terms of trying to drive a culture that is a really engaged culture? What are the sorts of issues about trying to manage people working remotely and how we actually deliver that for the future? So really asking our members, what are the things that are keeping them awake at night? And then thinking of those through so that we can provide top tips, but also information from other organisations, but also encouraging them to continue to keep measuring their levels of customer satisfaction and keep thinking about how they differentiate themselves as businesses through driving up the customer experience. Because one thing's for sure, if we revert to just a pricing strategy, then it's a nil-sum game. Those organisations that will be the ones that will survive will be those that actually differentiate through their service levels and maintain that going forward. And listen, really listen to what you're hearing from your customer base.
Joe, that's a fantastic way to finish. So I really enjoyed that. I always enjoy our chat. So thank you very much for sharing your insights into customer service and customer experience. And I'm sure we'll do a few more sort of chats like this in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.